There is a war going on. It is a spiritual war, a war between truth and lies. Only one thing cuts through all lies and opinions. It is God's word. It is God's sword.
There isn't anybody like our King. There's nobody like Christ. What we'll read of here, we're reading of a man. He's about 33 years old. He's a young man, to me. But he's actually from everlasting. He's from eternity. He's always been from the vanishing point and will be to the vanishing point. He is God. But he stepped into the world of humanity that he created. He stepped into this world as one of us. He became human, but I mean, very human, just as human as you and me, except not messed up human like I am and all my friends. We're all messed up. We're all descendants of Adam. We're all flawed. We've all got selfish, sinful tendencies, and we didn't have to learn them. And we cannot blame them on everything that we've been through either. Certainly, we've all been through things and environments and experiences and all of that, but the fact is we came into this world selfish. We arrived here. We were conceived with a flaw that we inherited from the first of us. And again, it was from Adam, the very first human. He passed his flaw onto us. And it came through our fathers. From father to child, the flaw is passed genetically. There's one man, the man we read of here, had no human father, supernaturally conceived by the Holy Spirit. He is, in fact, the Son of God. And he's in the world, and he has taught, and he has done wonders. He's done miracles. He has done things. He's got a hand, as far as we know, never made a fist, but only ever reached to help and heal. And now, in the chapter open before us, they will spike those hands to a tree, to a cross, and he'll let them. And he is letting all of this happen. I will remind you of the words of John in the previous chapter, again, John 18:4. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" That's what he did in Gethsemane. Knowing everything. He knew this wasn't some kind of tragic and series of unfortunate events. It was all the predetermined, deliberate counsel of eternal God. So here he is now. This young man stands before a tyrant named Pontius Pilate, who is the Roman governor. And the very first thing we read in verse 1, Pilate then took Jesus and flogged him. Okay, the flogging is a whipping, and it's not like some great bullwhip with one solid strand, even braided. Torture as that may be, it was worse than that. The Roman cat o' nine tails had multiple strands of leather, and in the tips of that leather would be little tiny lead balls tied tightly into the tips. When you hear a whip, make the crack sound. The sound of the crack, whether it's a whip or a towel, that snap is the sound of matter breaking the sound barrier. Did you know that? The whipping sound, the crack, is the sound barrier being broken. So it's the speed of the tip of that whip that is so very painful and has the ability to do such damage, and even more so when it's weighted. Reading about it, sometimes they'd improvise, sometimes they'd have to improvise. They put little pieces of stone, they tie that in, little pieces of flint or broken glass. But if in fact, and I personally believe, the Shroud of Turin is a legitimate artifact to go by. It is the Shroud of Turin is the most studied ancient artifact in the world, more than anything else. Nothing has been subjected to the analytics and all of the high-tech equipment. Everything from the space program in NASA has been dedicated to try to understand how a perfect photographic negative could be scorched faintly onto a piece of linen garment that is, 20 centuries old. Nobody can explain it away, though they've tried. The information available on the shroud indicate this scourging, this flogging, the severe whipping. And the indications from the shroud is that particular cat o' nine tails, that particular scourge, had tiny little lead barbells of dumbbells, tiny little, little ball on both ends with a sort of a bottleneck in between where the leather could be bound, where it could be tied. And each of them penetrate like a bullet the flesh of the subject. And according to the evidence in the Shroud of Turin, the scourge affected both his back and his front. It wrapped around. The detail is such that they could actually tell that there were likely two men with the scourge, with the whip, two different heights. I understand from all that I've read and studied over the years that this flogging, the scourging, was usually used, it was intended as a means to get the guilty to just confess, to admit, give information, settle his guilt. I mean, a lot of people can endure torture to a point, but it can become so very severe, under the proper application of the creative that people break. And men would. And I've read a number of things. Sometimes they would bind a man and have him sort of bent over a stump or something like that, stump or a stone. So the skin was really tight. Or sometimes they would hang the man, hang him by his hands so his skin was really tight in that stretched out position in order to maximize the torture. So when you just read a simple sentence, you cannot appreciate the trauma connected, because this book does not exaggerate, ever, or overstate anything. So one sentence, Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. So he gave the order, and it was done. His soldiers applied the whip. So Pilate will ultimately bring him back out after all of this abuse to make a presentation to them, to be able to tell this crowd, this mob, that has been whipped up to this weird frenzy by their religious leaders, be able to say, I have scourged him, we've tortured him. We find no fault. In other words, he confessed to nothing. And they were good at getting a confession out. They were professional, right? They go beyond that. Verse 2 says, when the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and a purple robe on him. Okay, now, let me give you another little piece of detail that comes from the image of the shroud, and you can decide for yourself whether you believe that's authentic. I would encourage you to read. I would encourage you to consider your sources. One, Jeremiah Johnston, has written extensively. He may be one of the best at that presentation on the shroud. A lot of information is available about it. I've been reading about it since the very first of the Shroud of Turin research projects, and I'm convinced that that thing is, in all my years of observation from a distance, I've read all of their, I can't say I've read all, I've read many of their papers and their books, seen their documentaries, and I have seen the zeal of the secular world that wants to write it off, that wants to ignore it, that wants to be able to go, it's not old enough according to carbon-14 dating methods. And only to discover they were wrong about their testing. They tested a patch on the fabric, not the original fabric. But I've seen the bias against it and the great zeal committed to trying to disprove or explain away this thing that nobody's been able to do that. And I'm convinced of it. The crown, traditionally, and you guys have seen them. You've been seeing them all your whole life, even before you were a Christian. You've seen images either on film or cards, posters, sketches, or paintings of a man with a wreath of thorns on his head. The Shroud of Turin reveals that it was not a wreath. It was not like a laurel. They didn't weave together a crown that would be beautiful. This was an ugly spectacle. It was a wad they twisted together. And imagine then a big ball of thorns that they twisted together and then jammed it on his head. Not a beautiful, symmetrical looking wreath, as the paintings always have it. But every part of his head, scalp, was pierced by these significant thorns. But it was the mockery of it. It was intended to look stupid. It wasn't intended to look symmetrical and cool. They weren't trying to do anything for the sake of paintings and future art. What they were intending to do was to mock him. He's a king. He's the king of the Jews, is he? Well, a king should have a crown. And so that was part of their mockery. They put it on his head. We also have the other gospel writers informing us that not only did they do that, and as John says right here in verse 2, they put a purple robe on him. The other gospel writers tell us they put a reed in his hand like a scepter. So mocking him, they put a crown on his head, which caused streams of blood. As you know, the smallest head wound, your scalp is nothing but tiny little blood vessels, and streams of blood all down in his face. And his beard, which, by the way, significant portions were ripped off, plucked out. They did that, and they put a reed in his hand so he'd have a scepter, and he held it. There's no pictures. They weren't taking pictures, but if they had cameras, he would have held the reed for the cameras. They handed him a reed. He didn't throw it down. He didn't let his arm hang loose. He held the reed. I bet he held the reed, and he looked at every one of them. Oh, man, they have no idea the king that he is and the scepter that will ultimately be in his hand. But he endured this. Then they took the reed out of his hand, and with it they beat the thorns. They beat the crown onto his scalp, so that his scalp had great thorns hitting the bone and going sideways. These great horrifying like splinters that would just anchor that, driving it in and anchoring it. So it was there to stay for the whole deed. They put a purple robe on him, so purple. It's the color of royalty. So again, they're mocking him. But imagine a back that has been shredded. They've already flogged him. His back is all open wounds. And they find a purple robe to throw over those bloody shoulders, over that bloody back. They mock him. He stands for this. Verse 3 says, and they were coming to him saying, Hail, King of the Jews! These are Romans. They have contempt for these people. And even more contempt for one that they hear might be their king. So they mock him with words. And then verse 3 says, and they were giving him slaps in the face. I want to say again, this book doesn't exaggerate. Slaps in the face were not like the finger slap. We're talking about the palm strikes. Frankly, any of us who've experienced a good strike in the face would rather have a punch than a palm. People don't hit you so hard with their fist. A fist isn't made for that kind of blunt trauma. So most people actually take it a little bit easy for the sake of their knuckles. Pull it just a little bit. Nobody does that with their palm. His face, no doubt, then, covered in his own blood, would be swelling, and these big hematomas would happen, thus distorting his facial features. That kind of trauma to the face brings about a disfiguring swelling. But none of his bones were broken. The image of the man who suffered this on the shroud has a significant dislocation of his cartilage and massive swelling here. But the prophecy was that none of his bones would be broken. None. Open-handed blows. And then verse 4 says, and Pilate came out again and said to them, that's the mob, Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him. And that is to say, so you may know that I checked, that we followed the standard procedure, and we tortured him. We shredded his back and his chest. We shredded him. He confessed to nothing. We found no guilt in him. In verse 5, then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. That's how they brought him out. All mocked. Friends, that's how they brought him out. That's how Pilate had him brought out. And Pilate said to them, Behold the man. I preached this last Christmas, Sunday before Christmas. No truer words did Pilate ever say, because there is nobody else that even lives up to the title of the man than this one, who endured that kind of mocking when he could have ended it any time he wanted to. He could have even stopped it from ever happening, but he endured it for us, took our place. There was a price to pay. There was a price that had to be paid, and there was nobody that could pay it except him. You had to be sinless in order to be a sacrifice. You had to be without blemish, morally speaking. He's the only one. There was nobody else that could. Nobody. He was the only one that could do it. God in the flesh, suffering the punishment that was due to all of the sinners of the world. He is the man. And I say to you, for you and me, what Pilate said should be and must be a way of life. It's beholding the man of all men. Never quit beholding him by faith. Just continue to behold the man. He captured my heart when I was young. By all that I read here, captured my heart and continues to. Got more of it now than he had when I was young. Now that I'm old, a lifetime beholding the man, and there's nobody that compares to him. There's no one, never will be. There's nobody who is such a man as the man of all men. And Pilate, so imagine what happens on that occasion. Jerusalem is swollen, its population has just multiplied. The entire nation is probably well over 1.5 million to 2 million people, because they're all in that city from all over their nation, because it's Passover time. And this massive mob sees what the Romans present to them, and needless to say, they are not impressed. So I bring you back to the end of chapter 18, when there was another guy also presented, and it was the contrast, no doubt, the contrast between this man covered in his own blood. He's been baptized in his own blood now, and he's been mocked and bound. He's standing there trembling, maybe teetering, faces all distorted, but he's still standing. Does he look like a hero? Does he look like something respectable? Contrast that with Barabbas. Now, whether it's visible or not, there is blood on Barabbas' hands. Whether it's visible, maybe it's been washed off, but he's killed. Any blood with Barabbas was on his filthy hands. He's a thief and a murderer. He pretends like he's a great patriot. He assumes the character that he's some kind of a Robin Hood, but he's no Robin Hood. He is no just patriot. He's a thief. He kills, and he masquerades as a real zealot, patriot, but he's just a thief. But he looks like a hero. Well, you can't go by what you see, can you guys? You can't judge a book by its cover, can you? And we, all of us, every one of us, are subject to being fooled by what we see. Well, because we're stupid. And we are easily deceived. If we had been there that day, we would have, and how do I know? We would have said, Barabbas, he's the one, set Barabbas free. Away with this man, this bloody, disfigured mess. We got our hopes all up, and now look at him. We would probably all have been with that crowd saying the same thing, because we once did, one way or the other. One way or the other, we've fallen for the illusions. You know, maybe the world had something to offer. The world was, greater than the kingdom. We've, gone through our various, seasons of life, questioning the goodness of God, questioning the fairness of God or the wisdom of God, or even if there is a God. So I expect that we would have been with the mob, fooled by what we were looking at. So behold the man. The man is wearing a crown of thorns that looks ridiculous, just big, massive pile of thorns that stand up tall on his head, like a big cone, mocking, covered in his own blood, and the purple robe. It's that purple robe. Can you imagine what that? I mean, their idea of king would be like King Saul was, their first king. Again, head and shoulders above all the people. He towered over everyone. He had symmetry. He was majestic. Anybody looked at him when that's a king. That's what I'm talking about. But his heart was pitiful. His heart was weak and pathetic. Later they would discover God's chosen king, David, though he wasn't jagged or majestic. In fact, he was kind of a cute little guy. Even as a grown man, he's just more known for his cuteness. But he led them well, and he proved to be great on the inside. But this one with a purple robe on, purple robe and a red, bloody face. Chunks of his beard are missing. His face is disfigured. And in the words of the prophet Isaiah, from Isaiah chapter 53, his facial features were marred. More than any man, so much that you couldn't really tell that he was a man. He is the man. So they see that. Verse 6, when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify, crucify." So they got a chant going. They started this, "Which side are you on?" Stupid song. That's in your headlines right now. That's current news. They started a chant, "Crucify, crucify, crucify." And Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews, verse 7, the Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself out to be the Son of God." So they insist to the Roman governor that this man has committed a capital offense by our law. And if in fact he claimed to be God and wasn't God, it would be a crime. There and then. But never considering the possibility, it was actually who he said. The authority to do executions has been taken away from the Jews. They've lamented this. It happened years before this moment. Even that itself, no doubt due to the sovereignty of God, that they were denied by the Roman Empire the authority to enforce their own law. And so they can't do executions. They're not allowed to kill anybody. They have to get the Romans to do it. Had they done it themselves, it would have been as the law of Moses prescribed, death by stoning. And it was God who came up with that. It was God who commanded that capital offenses, capital crimes, should be dealt with by stoning. And the first stone thrown should be from the eyewitnesses that condemn the guilty. After due process has been happened, and the person who's been accused of a capital offense has been proved guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt, the elders of the people would order the execution, and the very first stone thrown had to be from the eyewitness that condemned him. The eyewitnesses, plural, because it took more than one. It was in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, capital offenses. And it's a serious system, the system that God instituted, because under that system, if you accuse someone of a capital crime, and then due process happens, and they're proven to be innocent, then you have been discovered to be a false witness, and that is a capital crime. And so the intention that you had for them is what would be your sentence. And if you were accusing somebody of a crime like blasphemy, there was a capital offense, and you were proven to be a liar, bearing false witness, the penalty you intended for the person you were accusing became your penalty. So it was a system instituted by God. It was severe. But it was supposed to be dealt out in a just way. Well, the Jews have had that taken from them by the Romans. And so now they're demanding that Pilate have this man crucified, that you Romans, you do it, because he broke our law. Our law was a capital offense, but what was the crime again that they accused him of? He ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. He made himself out to be the Son of God. Let nobody here make a mistake. They weren't wrong about what he claimed to be. And if you are the Son of God, then you are God the Son. He actually did claim divinity. He did. He wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. So they charged him with this blasphemy. He made himself out to be the Son of God. Look at verse 8. And therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he became more afraid. I bet he did. That's a frightening thing, that this man has identified himself as the Son of God. I've seen a lot of interviews by the Shroud of Turin researchers, the scientists. One of those scientists, who's an expert on proteins and blood, there were some stains on the Shroud of Turin that had long held, people had long held that those were blood stains. But the attempt to try to identify 20-century-old stains as blood had failed until the right science was applied. And that one particular scientist, I remember his interview, he was the one who made the discovery that not only is it human blood, even the blood type, that this particular man who bled on this fabric is qualified to be a universal donor. Anyway, he was asked, I think it was Larry King, way back when he was still, doing, it was in the 90s. And he asked that particular researcher, who is not a Christian, he asked him, are you a Christian? The guy said, no. Have you had any kind of a religious experience through all of this? And the man said that actually when he had his big breakthrough, he was working alone, it was nighttime, and it was, at first it was like a big thrill. Yes, it is. It is blood. He proved it is blood. Then his second thought hit him and frightened him. Whose blood he may be looking at? Whose blood he may be examining? Frightening. But that was it. He got over it. It passed. Didn't cause him to fall down and be broken. So also Pontius Pilate, Son of God. Now, Pilate's not on the outside. He's not going to go, he's not going to do that on the outside. He's only going to scowl, but on the inside, an awful knot, a dreadful stomach knot just happened. This man claims to be. This man who we scourged and have bloodied. We have marked. This one that we put a crown and beat it into his scalp. Claims he's the Son of God. He was more afraid. He entered, verse 9 says, into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you? And I have the authority to crucify you. Pilate is dealing with something he's never seen before. Somebody that does not seem to want to save himself. He couldn't save himself and us. And that, of course, comes up as he's hanging on the cross. They'll mock him, and from the ground below the cross, they'll go, come off the tree and we'll believe you. Save yourself, come on. Say you're the Messiah, you will say that you're the Son of God. Save yourself. Just pull yourself off those spikes and come down here, then we'll believe you. Trying to set the terms for God, but he could not save himself and you and me. He couldn't save us and himself. So Pilate, can you imagine Pontius Pilate, he's intense, I think. You don't get to be Roman governor, unless you've bought your way there, and there's no indication that Pilate did that. You got to be some intense and somewhat ruthless. You've got to be a hard man to come to that place, to come up through the ranks to become governor of a difficult place like Judea. And here's a man that he's face to face with, a distorted, swollen, bloodied face, swollen lips. And the man can probably hardly see out of his eyes. But he's looking out at Pilate. And Pilate's like, you're not answering. Do you not know the authority that I have? I have the authority to release you. I could release you. I could let you go. I could spare your life. Or I have the power to have you crucified. Don't you realize this? Look at this. Jesus answered in verse 11. I've often wondered what it sounded like. And it's hard to speak with a mouthful of blood. When you get hit in the mouth, now some of you guys know about this. It's the reason why we wear mouth guards in sports. You get hit in the mouth. Your teeth cut your lips. Your lips are his, no doubt, all cut. And they bleed and they swell. And with swollen lips and distorted features that is of his face, his answer was, to Pilate, he said, you would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. Well, see, everybody knows that. You remember the centurion from Matthew chapter 8, Luke chapter 7? You remember that centurion? The centurion who was in Capernaum, the guy who was commended, the highest commendation Christ ever gave for faith. And what is it that you got to have in order to please God? Well, it's faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews chapter 11 says. For anybody that comes to God has got to first believe that he is, that God is, and then secondly, that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. The highest commendation, the highest compliment ever given by our King for faith was given to a Gentile Roman centurion who said, he said through a messenger, you don't need to come to my house. Don't go to that trouble. I'm not worthy of that kind of honor or that kind of trouble. But neither thought I myself worthy to come and speak to you in person. I'm not even worthy of that. Just listen to my messenger. Just say the word. And the slave that I love will be healed. Just say the word. Because I also, what did that centurion say? I also am a man set under authority, having soldiers under me. I say to this one, go, and he goes. I say to this one, come, and he comes. I say to my slave, do this, and he doeth it. Do you hear the words of the centurion? Where does authority come from? Does it come from you work it up? No. Does it come from how much you bench? No. Does it come from how many you've beaten? No, it doesn't. Where does authority come from? It doesn't come from you. It doesn't come from us. It comes from above us. The Roman centurion understood that he had authority because he was under it. Like he's a conduit for authority that comes from above him. Higher officials have given him authority that passes through him. The reason why he says to someone, go, and he goes, or come, and he comes, is because he's under authority. And nobody who's not under authority ever has any authority. Son of God said to Pilate, the governor of Rome, you would have no authority over me if it hadn't been given you from above. That is him saying, you have been allowed this from way above you. It's almost a way of saying, don't boast of your authority because it was given to you from far above you. You have been allowed to be in this spot at this moment. He said, you'd have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. And for this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. He did not just tell Pilate, "You're innocent." He said, "You're not the most guilty." That's what he just said. "He who handed me over to you is guilty of the greater sin." Verse 12, as a result of this, those words, as a result of those words, Pilate kept seeking to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself to be a king opposes Caesar." He is challenging the authority of. All of a sudden, they're all Caesar's, defenders. All of a sudden, they're all about Rome. Since when? When it's convenient for them. "You're no friend of Caesar." In other words, they're threatening political consequences. He claims to be a king. He's challenging you, emperor. How dare you let him go? How dare you suggest it? If you release this man, that was a threat. Verse 13, therefore when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, but in Hebrew it's called Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. Remember that. It's the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold," and listen, whenever you see the word Jews in the New Testament, particularly in the 4 Gospels, it is a reference not to an ethnicity. It is not a reference to a religion. It's not a reference to the masses. It's a reference to their spiritual leaders, the leaders of the Jews. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And there's an exclamation point here in the LSB. First he said, "Behold the man." And now Pilate has come to the place recognizing that he's more than the man. "Behold your king." So that provoked them, and they cried out. Verse 15 says, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." David's dynasty had ended, first they could tell. We have no king. It's quite a confession. Our king is gone. His line ended. They don't know that this man that they're demanding to be crucified has descended down through the line of David. The very line, the one that God promised Messiah, he would be one of your descendants. We have no king. What a statement. We have no king but Caesar. So Pilate is in this position, indeed. And he is guilty of sin, according to the Son of God, but he's not the most guilty. The religious leaders, the ones who actually said he is a devil, and he does miracles by the power of the devils. He does cast out spirits by Beelzebub, by the prince of the demons. They couldn't deny the miracle, but they assigned it to an evil source. They're being political. That's what they were. In the words of the high priest, better that one man should die than all the people. This talk of him being Messiah, this mania, this excitement about his miracles and his teachings, it's going to bring us into trouble with Rome. We are the stewards of these people. We are their shepherds. And we must protect them from this threat of this young man. So they're the ones. Their high priest said better that one should die. No, they're guilty. They know he's innocent. They may not believe his claim to be the Son of God, but they know better than the things that they say. Verse 16. So then he then delivered him over to be crucified. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. Golgotha. It has the Greek translation of Calvary. That's significant to us. I understand there are some heavy metal churches that are Golgotha Chapel. Golgotha sounds a little heavier, but it's the same as Calvary. Calvary is just an alternate translation. Calvary is significant to us because of what happened on that little piece of ground, that hill of a skull. What happened on Skull Hill and the cross that was planted and a man that was impaled to it on that hill determines the eternal destiny of whosoever will. So they took him to that place of a skull. No, listen, the historians, anthropologists, archaeologists, Bible scholars, nobody is absolutely certain why Skull Hill was called Skull Hill. There are some who believe it was called Skull Hill because it was there that David brought that trophy, the head of the giant, the skull that he took off himself with the giant's own sword. And he brought it to the king that had been kept, ultimately that had been buried there in that hill. There are others who maintain it's Skull Hill because it looked like a skull. I think that's reasonable. No, maybe it's all of that. That the limestone side of the hill had these breakouts, these little caves that look like eye sockets in a mouth. There are caves everywhere there along the hillsides, the way limestone is. It'll sometimes be hollowed out. It's an ugly place. It's just outside the walls of the city. And it's a very public place. That's why it was chosen, because the Romans executed people very publicly. And so they wanted it to be done in view of a road. Now, if you are in Jerusalem today, you go. There's two different sites that people debate over. The one that I and most of the Calvary Chapels, Pastor Chuck and others following him, have long believed is Skull Hill. And still, despite the centuries that have passed and despite the wars that have been fought and the erosion and everything else, there's still a hill. Right nearby, what is the best, very truly best potential empty tomb that might well have been the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. The tomb, what we typically refer to is Christian pilgrims, or as tourists there in Jerusalem refer to it as the Garden Tomb, was clearly a tomb owned by a very wealthy man, and the wealth of the man is evidenced by the quality of the work, that it was carved out. This wasn't a cave improvised, but it bears the chisel marks of the slave labor that carved it out. And along with it, the shelf where the body would be laid to decompose and return to dust. The chambers where, as was their practice, they didn't buy a big piece of land and then plant bodies as we do in North America, but rather the Jews and Mediterranean region people would instead carve out a tomb and would typically have two rooms. One is for the decomposing of their family member, and the other room carved out is where after the period of time where the decomposition would happen, the family members would reopen the tomb and come in and gather. Now all that's left are the bones and the dust. Sweep it all together and makes a much smaller package as dust and as bones. And they would put them in beautiful ornate boxes. And they would stack the boxes in the other room with all of the other family members. So they'd be joined. They would be gathered to their people, their family. So this particular tomb, the garden tomb, it is that. It's been, it was clearly commissioned by a wealthy man. The garden that the tomb is in has all of the evidence of the great wealth of its owner, including a massive cistern. Not only did they carve out the tomb, they carved down a gigantic water reservoir. And it is gigantic. The photos, and I can't tell you that I've been inside that cistern. It's sealed off. But they keep the photos of the inside of the cistern on the outside, and you look at it, and the depth of it is like the depth of the room that we're in, from the ceiling top down, because they show the photographs of the archaeologists on ladders, standing in the middle of the ladder, with the opening above. You can get a sort of a visual handle on the size and depth of that cistern. And I've seen it. And the other thing that is one of the best reasons to strongly suspect, you can't settle it and you can't be dogmatic about it, it is a rich man's tomb. It has all the things going for it. It is just outside the walls of the old city. It is also beside a significant Roman road. But then you go to a little observation deck that they've made that allows you to see over the fence. And just outside the fence is modern Jerusalem, a bustling and busy, crowded ancient city. With somebody's always honking. There's always a car and always a truck trying to wind through these little narrow streets. But just over the fence is now a bus station. It's a bus station. But the backdrop of the bus station is a hill that has these little indentions that really do create the picture of a skull, and you can certainly see how it once was. And they have even older photographs, black and white photographs from the earliest visits of archaeologists before Jerusalem was rebuilt and inhabited in the modern age. And you can see that it looked even more like Skull Hill before the erosion and the wars and all of that. So it's a prime candidate for being the spot because the tomb is nearby. So practical. Time was short. Our king would give up the ghost and die. As the dusk was approaching the end of the day, Shabbat would begin. And so they were in a hurry. This had to be done quickly. And it was then that Joseph of Arimathea steps up and sort of takes ownership as a follower. And he asks Pilate for permission to have that body, to bury him. And he bears him close, he bears him nearby. This is where we leave our story for tonight. Place of a skull. Josh, well, we'll go out singing. It shouldn't be morbid, though it is somber. This is not a night for, pastor comedy. It shouldn't be morbid, though. Do you understand that nothing was a tragedy? Nothing happening here was part of a series of unfortunate events? No, it was deliberate. The man of all men, knew everything that was going to happen, stepped right into this. He went willingly. No, he went obediently. That's even better than willingly. All right, in a way he went willingly. He yielded his will. But he prayed in Gethsemane, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. there's got to be some other way. If there is no other way, all right, then that your will be done. Not my will, but thy will be done. So I guess it's not inaccurate to say that he went willingly, but it's even better to say that he went obediently to this cross. He did this for us. Glory be to his name. Let's all stand together. We'll go out singing. And it was, he did it so we could all live forever. And he will rise. I hate to leave him here, but he ain't staying there, and you guys all know that.
Hey, thanks for listening. We pray that the Word of God will speak to your heart as you meditate on it. If we can help you grow, or if you have any questions, you can visit us at our website at ccbangor.org. Give us a phone call at area code 207-991-9555, or you can shoot us an email at office@ccbangor.org. On behalf of Pastor Ken and all of us here at Calvary Chapel Central Maine, we wish you grace and peace.